Hello, I'm Doug Sharp, host of the National Leadership Briefing, and this is the Midweek Touchpoint. Well, I really enjoy getting together with you every month on the National Leadership Briefing and also on these midweek touch points because, of course, we're always looking for those opportunities where we can exercise our combined influence and speak to the issues that are important to us as members of the faith communities in Canada. Well, we have one such opportunity before us now, and I am excited in a way to bring it to you. However, it is on a very, very difficult subject. And that is, we have a piece of legislation that is moving through the House of Commons at a very rapid rate regarding euthanasia and expanding euthanasia so that it's easier to get and in more circumstances people can get it. Now, we're concerned about this legislation because, of course, the all-important third pillar for us is that the laws and policies of civil government, that's these elected representatives that are considering this legislation right now, we believe that the laws and policies that are passed and enacted by them must provide for the safety and security of the citizens, especially the vulnerable that live among us in our communities. So let me give you a little bit of background on this now. I'm not going to go into too much detail because if you were on our last National Leadership Briefing, you got a full briefing on the piece of legislation that's before the House of Commons right now. If you didn't get it, I'm going to include a link below this video so that you can actually tune in and catch up to where we're at right now. But this is quickly what brought us to today. Back in 2016, the federal government, our Trudeau-led federal government, announced that they were going to be passing legislation that enacted a legal parameter where one person in Canada could take the life of another person, and it's called medical aid in dying. Now, there were all sorts of conversations at the time about why they were doing it and what they were going to be doing, and those conversations, again, you can refer to the video below, but one very important part of that conversation that was going on back in 2016, I want to remind you of today in case you missed it. Back in 2016, when the federal government said that they were going to do this, we took a look at the plan that they had to legalize euthanasia here in Canada, and we discovered that there were serious gaps in protection in the law for people that are vulnerable, people with chronic conditions, people that had mobility challenges, the shut-in elderly, people that were perhaps living and would like to have palliative care expanded to them and didn't have that as a choice in Canada. There were all sorts of people with disabilities that were speaking out and going, wait a second, this is kind of dangerous. And so we brought these to the attention of the government in a campaign we said was called Say No, K-N-O-W, to euthanasia. We also provided the government at that time 27 points, 27 things that they could do to close these gaps and better protect vulnerable citizens in our society from falling prey to euthanasia. Well, at that time, all 27 points, which I'm going to include in the link below this video, all 27 points were passed on by the government and the legislation was passed in the House of Commons. Now, at the time, there were several members of parliament who looked me in the eye because we actually met with members of parliament and we told them, we said, look, you have just passed a piece of legislation that you will live to regret, I can guarantee you, but you've also now placed vulnerable people in harm's way. And they told me, all of them, they said, do not worry, Doug, because the provincial governments of our country are going to be providing those protections as they fulfill this mandate of medical aid in dying. They also assured me at the time that they would be reviewing the legislation in 5 years. It says right in the bill that they passed that there would be a mandatory review of the legislation so they could assess the harm that was being done to vulnerable people at that time and understand better where they were at. Well, I am here today to tell you that those two things have not occurred. What has happened is that our federal government, not only have they failed to meet the condition of reviewing the last 5 years of euthanasia deaths and telling us where the harm has been served up to the citizens, they have also not ensured that the provinces are delivering euthanasia in a way that is protecting vulnerable citizens as well. So here we are, 5 years later, we've now euthanized close to 14,000 people here in our country. At the end of this year, there will be a total of 20,000 euthanasia deaths in our country, and we do not have an accurate assessment as to the harm that has been done to vulnerable communities and citizens of those communities. So here we are. Why am I bringing this to you now? Why am I giving you this history lesson and bringing you up to today? Because again, now in the House of Commons today, there is another bill before the House of Commons members where they want to expand euthanasia now to make it even have greater accessibility. Here's the challenge though, is that not only have they not fulfilled their promise or fulfilled their commitment to us from the previous piece of legislation that they passed, but they're moving forward as if it's not a big deal. And that again, they're telling us, please don't worry, Doug, because vulnerable citizens within our community are going to be protected. Well, do you know what? I'm just not convinced. I'm just not convinced because here in my office, I've been receiving calls, people have been in touch with me, and they tell me the stories of how people that they know have died with euthanasia deaths. And this is a very dangerous and remains a very dangerous piece of legislation that exists in its previous form. And now to expand it and grow it beyond that is even more troubling to all of us. So this is what I'm actually here today to do, is I'm here to encourage you to take this opportunity to speak with one voice, remembering who we are as people of the faith communities of Canada. First and foremost, we are here as people of the faith communities of Canada, called to care about our neighbor, the well-being of the people that live among us in our communities. And when it comes to what we can do, we are happy to do whatever we can because, again, we're called to be there on behalf of our neighbor. So let's take a look at what we can do. We've got a piece of legislation before the House of Commons, and we need to know more about it. So what can we do? Well, we can educate ourselves. We can raise our level of understanding and awareness on what it is that's happening. So I encourage you to take a look, if you haven't already seen it, at this past national leadership briefing, where I brought all of the resources to you so that you could review the piece of legislation for yourself. And then I've also encouraged you to get in touch with your member of parliament and do two things. One is to tell them that you are concerned about the current legislation in front of them, that you are concerned for the vulnerable people within your community. These are things that you do not support. And secondly, I'm going to encourage you to remind them of the promise that they made to us back in 2016 when they told us that they would provide us with a full review of the legislation that was passed previous so that we could assess the harm that is being done to vulnerable citizens in our communities before we move any further down the road of euthanasia expansion here in our country. So that's what I want you to do. I'm going to provide you a couple of links below in the video where you can actually click on them to find out, first off, who your member of parliament is and all of the contact information you'll need just to get in touch with them and tell them that. But you got to do it right away because this bill is racing through the House of Commons and we are again in the unenviable position of having to chase it. We cannot count on our current members of parliament to make this all-important decision on their own. They need to be reminded of the promise that they made. And then second, what else can we do? Well, we can take advantage of opportunities we have to pray corporately together about these issues before the House of Commons. Pray for our leaders. Pray for the issues that they have before them. Pray for future considerations of other bills and stay together in unison, speaking to the issue of protecting vulnerable citizens. So I'm going to be providing you with opportunities as well, not only in this National Leadership Briefing update, but also I'm going to be providing you with future opportunities for when we can come together and pray. There's one coming up right away this Saturday, and I'll be telling you about that in the notes below, but you've got to take a look at that. Please do and consider joining us for that. And then the final thing we can do, of course, is we can plan for the future. We have an election coming up, and what I'm going to encourage you to do is no matter what happens as this legislation goes through the House of Commons, I want you to remember what has happened and remind ourselves at election time what transpired so that we can take advantage of that opportunity to place members of parliament in seats in the House of Commons that share our views and values when it comes to the prioritization of vulnerable citizens in our community and not whatever skewed ideological bent they have about the need to euthanize people at the end of life as opposed to providing them with adequate palliative care. So I thank you so much for your time today. I encourage you, please do not miss this opportunity to take action, to pray, and to plan for the future, because this is what we're doing here on the National Leadership Briefing. Every time we have an opportunity, we maybe don't take full advantage of it because we haven't rolled along far enough down the road. But you know what? We're getting better every time. We're getting bigger every time. We're growing by our numbers. We're growing the number of people that we're speaking to and communicating with, and we're growing our influence. And it's exciting, the opportunities that we'll have on the road ahead. I'm sure we'll take full advantage of those. But in the meantime, until those opportunities come up, I just want you to know here at the National Leadership Briefing, we are praying for you. We're praying for your family, and we're going to continue to pray for Canada. Thanks so much for your time, and I'll look forward to seeing you on the road ahead. Bye for now.